Parliament declared a state of emergency today as the country deteriorated further into chaos.
In Albania today, there are more guns out of control than in any country in Europe. The Albanians who embraced capitalism with gusto and then lost all their capital are now embracing violence.
Anyone suspected of working for the government is interrogated at gunpoint.
President, out!
Albanians are in despair. This afternoon they were still trying to extract their life savings from the country's collapsed investment funds. These are the so-called pyramid schemes that ensnared virtually the whole population here, promising Europe's poorest people interest rates of 70% a month. The collapse has left tens of thousands destitute. Investors like Hasan Kalaya are waiting in vain for refunds. He sold all his possessions to take part. No one warned him it could never last. And the anger is still building. I have nothing left, absolutely nothing, this man told me, adding, the government promoted the schemes and encouraged us to invest. Remarkably, some of the pyramid schemes are staggering on. This one, known as VEFA, was today still surrounded by investors waiting for interest payments. Throughout Tirana, riot police were on the streets to make sure that popular anger did not lead to violent political demonstrations. But rallies did take place in the south. The Albanian authorities have lost all control of the city of Vlora, where a pyramid investment scheme collapsed, triggering an uprising. The police and security forces have fled, leaving demonstrators to rule the city. The government stands accused, at best, of gross mismanagement. But many opposition critics say that in reality, it is guilty of widespread and systematic corruption. Robert Moore, News at 10, Tirana.
We witnessed the street battle from the very start. The riot police attempted to disperse the people. They too continually picked up stones to throw back. They had attempted to pick off small groups. They were preventing them from entering the city square, but they soon lost control and couldn't stop them.
The opposition parties had called for peaceful protests on a daily basis, similar to the ones in Serbia, but their appeals haven't worked. Once again, the anger is boiling over.
The police were hopelessly outnumbered. Any further advance was impossible. They had to retreat. The crowds had swelled to thousands and they gave chase. Some police managed to escape and regroup. A woman made an appeal for calm, but it was lost amongst the anger and hatred here. Then there was gunfire. Some of the shooting was only a few feet away from our camera. It was the start of a second battle. The demonstrators had the police station under siege. The police then used a water cannon, but it was another tactic which failed to quell the riot. Demonstrators told me they had been provoked by the police after the death of a protester last night. There were more than 60 injured, either from being hit by stones or after beatings. Doctors at Vlora Hospital said there were 2 deaths, one from bullet wounds. In the comparative calm of a graveside outside the city, there was a funeral for a man who died last night. Even here amongst the mourning, gunfire. What had started as peaceful demonstrations over the loss of money from collapsed pyramid investment schemes has turned vicious, and few believe the violence is over yet. Andrew Simmons, News at 10 in Vlora. Another day of demonstrations in Vlora, a lawless city. The government says it wants to have dialogue instead of a clampdown to restore order here. But in an ITN interview, the Prime Minister still claimed the government can't be blamed for the collapsed pyramid schemes.
Only the government informed the people and was the first that informed and stopped this activity. All leaders of opposition parties and other parties never informed the people for this danger.
With Albania in turmoil, President Sali Berisha told a rally tonight he couldn't be blamed for the massive losses of life savings in pyramid schemes. And afterwards he told me he was hoping for calm even though protests continue. But he said the government couldn't pay back all of the money.
There is no government that could pay the money given in a free will and a free decision by free citizens.
And you deny the charges that your government is involved in corruption and has profited from
the
these
government
schemes?
is absolutely not involved.
Why can't you let the people demonstrate freely?
No, we could allow people to demonstrate freely.
Those comments will do nothing to calm the situation, especially the president's insistence that rallies here in Skanderbeg Square can't go ahead because of security. If anything, this crisis could escalate. Andrew Simmons, ITN, Tirana.
They push and they shout, but today it was orderly. Europe's poorest, now poorer still, trying to get back the life savings they lost. A handful get a handout, but millions are still left with nothing but their rage. They took it to the streets, venting it at a rally, but that wasn't enough. It spilled over into the worst violence Albania's capital has seen in weeks. The police tried everything. First they beat them, then they threw their stones back, then they opened fire. They were warning shots, but Albania today doesn't need any more warnings. It's on the very brink of anarchy. The Albanians who embraced capitalism with gusto and then lost all their capital are now embracing violence, and week by week, city by city, it is spreading. There was more proof today of why. A huge company that hundreds of thousands invested in promised to give most people back their money. But there were just 200 names on this list. They were disappointed and they are destitute.
10,000 mark.
10,000 German marks.
Deutsche Mark, yeah.
That's £3,000 gambled and now gone. This company is Albania's biggest. But even the bankers here say it simply doesn't have enough money to pay back all these people. If it collapses, diplomats say it won't be too long before the whole country follows it. Albania is teetering. Its president is defiant, but his victory salutes seem less convincing by the day. Bill Neely, News at 10, Tirana.
The Albanian parliament declared a state of emergency today as the country deteriorated further into chaos. It's ordered the army to crush continuing anti-government protests. Our correspondent Andrew Simmons witnessed the security crackdown as he attempted to travel to rebel towns in the south.
Earlier this evening, military reinforcements were sent south. Tonight we followed them and found the roads blocked. The only way in or out is by treacherous mountain tracks. Eventually, we found people outside their homes, terrified, not knowing whether to join the police or the protesters. We don't want civil war, they told me. Secret police were soon to stop us filming. They're now setting up the roadblocks, preparing for a showdown. And so tonight, the protesters' ultimatum still stands. They say nothing short of capitulation by President Berisha will stop them. By ordering this clampdown, he's done the opposite. And Albania is plunged into its most tense and volatile state since this crisis began. On every street in the centre of Tirana, secret police enforcing a state of emergency which compares with this poor country's harsh communist past. State television broadcasts announced a curfew from 8 o'clock each evening and warned that from this afternoon, any protesters still bearing weapons could be shot on sight. The announcements also on radio left Albania in a state of shock. Throughout the country, no one is allowed to walk in groups larger than 4 people, a ruling which was imposed immediately. And with an eerie atmosphere hanging over the capital, heavy media censorship is being enforced. The secret police banning filming on the streets and threatening restricted travel for everyone. The offices of Albania's best-selling newspaper were set on fire last night. It supports the opposition and it's been forced out of business.
You can imagine that there is a blackout information in the country now. And even if we can print something, of course not the whole newspaper, but some small information and commentaries, I think we cannot do it because they say we have to take a license.
There's been looting at the biggest investment company, VEFA. The protesters there have called off a threatened march to the capital because they say it would end in bloodshed. The city is still in a lawless state. As Albania's parliament started voting for the re-election of President Sali Berisha, there was uncertainty over the next move in this show of force by what is in effect a one-party state. While the president's forces have a firm grip here in the capital, his army and secret police appear poised now to try and quell the uprising in the south. If that happens, the cost in human lives could be colossal. Andrew Simmons, ITN, Tirana.
This evening, Albania remains under the tightest of curfews. From dusk until dawn, only the security forces are allowed on the streets. Those who violate the emergency regulations are detained. Albania's flawed experiment with democracy has been suspended. The secret police have been given full presidential authority to crush dissent. This is a European nation coming to terms with martial law. Freedom to travel and to film have been severely restricted. But in a journey down to southern Albania, we saw armour and tanks on the move, apparently to cut off the rebellion before it gathers momentum. But whether President Berisha will order the army to retake by force the rebel-held towns of the south remains unclear. The rebel groups remain supremely confident, prospering in the atmosphere of anarchy along Albania's Adriatic coast, and even able to seize part of the Albanian Navy, taking charge of several patrol boats. In response, the police and security forces, many reportedly mercenaries, have set up a network of roadblocks. Travellers are being searched for weapons and reporters have been detained. Any gathering of more than 4 people has been declared illegal by the government. There are many here who say Albanians face a simple choice: living in a dictatorship or enduring anarchy. With the martial law and the state of emergency, all sense of democracy here has vanished. The police commander in charge of this part of southern Albania insists that the situation is being stabilized and the protesters isolated. The idea, he said, is to isolate the town of Vlora and wait for the anger to die out. But opposition leaders are warning that the hardline security measures in force may provoke a full-scale civil war. And for the first time, the government seems to be deploying the military forces needed to suppress the protests and save the regime. Robert Moore, News at 10, Southern Albania.
Saranda is in a state of open armed rebellion against Sali Berisha, the president in Tirana, who now has absolutely no control over events in this part of his country. This morning, a motley band of opposition supporters, many of them just teenagers, were still ransacking the military base abandoned by the president's army over the weekend. Weapons and ammunition are being carried off and distributed among anti-Berisha factions, not just from this base, but from anything up to 30 others along the southern coast and its hinterland. The almost non-stop firing in the air is an indication of the plentiful supply of ammunition and of the nervous defiance of people in places like Saranda. But in the center of this town of some 30,000, there's an uncertainty as to what happens next. telephone links have been cut off between here and Vlora, the earlier centre of resistance further north, rumoured overnight to be threatened by government tanks. Opposition supporters claim that over the past 5 years, Sali Berisha has shown he's no better than the post-war Stalinist dictator Enver Hoxha.
We want not Berisha, because he stayed 5 years in her chair, and he fight with the same guns who Hoxha's fight 50 years, and we will not him.
But what if President Berisha sends in his soldiers, his police, his tanks? What will happen here then?
The guns, the tanks, the ships are in our hands, and we know if he come the same, and here the police, the army. I know that tomorrow I have to go in the prison for 20 years, for 30 years. I know, I'm sure that I fight.
They made 2 or 3 circuits of the town, bombed and left.
So what do you think is going to happen next?
We can die, we're not going to give up. We don't want Sali, it's war.
Yesterday evening, there was a rally in the main square, people gathering among the wreckage of police vehicles burnt when the town's police station was attacked over the weekend. Also attacked and beaten was the town's mayor, a member of President Berisha's Democratic Party. He called for calm and pleaded with the people to lay down their weapons in accordance with the state of emergency orders issued yesterday. His pleas were met with open derision and hostility. By this morning, the mayor had gone into hiding. Out in the bay, just visible from the square, 2 Navy Coast Patrol boats seized by opposition supporters were adding to the tension by firing their guns in the air. But inside the town hall, the defiance was tinged with more than a little fear that the situation was sliding into anarchy. A group of opposition party leaders formed an ad hoc committee and tried to contact Sali Berisha. While we filmed them, all they could reach was the president's secretariat. The committee wanted assurances that their town would not be attacked. What they had to offer in return was unclear. The opposition in Saranda, and most likely elsewhere in Albania, is fragmented and without clear objectives beyond its aim of forcing the president out of office.
All the people now are held all the weapons. It's about 11,000 guns in the hand of the people. The young people, all the people is against Mr. Berisha now, you see.
What would happen here if Mr. Berisha did send government soldiers here?
Will be war. Will be war. Who will win? I don't know. Will be war. We want to prevent this now. That's why we are taking now.
What do the people of this town feel, though, about the president?
Hate. Hate, to tell the truth.
Though normal supply routes have been cut with most shops shut or looted, some food is getting through. There are, however, fears of eventual food shortages, especially if Saranda falls under a state of siege. Outside town, vans carrying bread have been stopping at roadsides to supply the rural population. Here we found a group of conscript soldiers singing in the ancient Albanian style. The soldiers, most not older than 18, were on their way home, having been told to leave their barracks by their officers because of the current unrest. It appears that the authorities in Tirana are uncertain of support from soldiers who come from villages and towns now controlled by the opposition, and feel that disbanded forces are better than ones which can be organized to turn against President Berisha. The soldiers themselves appear in high spirits, glad to be returning to their families, perhaps also happy not to have to take sides in the conflict which appears to be looming. Today, the boats seized from the Albanian armed forces were tied up at the quayside. Militant opposition supporters have shown they're able to use the guns on board, if necessary, to repel any attempt to retake the town from the sea. There's little doubt, however, that heavy loss of life would follow if the nerves of a highly volatile local population were tested with an open attack. Such fearsome weapons in the hands of the opposition are what sets these events in Albania apart from all the recent anti-government protests in the Balkans. Nobody's really in control of all this potential violence. What's more, President Berisha may well use the threat represented by these arms as the reason to launch an attack.
raising the spectre of all-out civil war. Gabby Rado, Channel 4 News, Saranda.
This morning, armed opposition supporters gathered on the hillside which dominates the approach to Saranda. At their makeshift checkpoint, they positioned a tank left behind by President Berisha's army. There was alarm and anger when word arrived that forces loyal to the government were deployed along the road inland and had wounded some rebel fighters. The tension was heightened by the presence nearby of the burnt wreckage of 2 cars, from which 4 men in civilian clothes had yesterday opened fire. They'd been counterattacked, 1 man was killed inside a car, 2 escaped, and 1 was beaten and taken prisoner. The more militant opposition fighters led a march down the road intending to take on the enemy. The raggle-taggle appearance of the column told its own tale. These were men who had armed themselves only in the past few days with whatever weapons had been seized from abandoned army barracks. They were, however, fired up with resentment against the president they consider a dictator and believe rumours of outrages committed against their own people. Their leaders in Saranda do, however, realise the danger of appearing to be nothing more than rampaging rebels. They want an international delegation to come to Saranda to ensure there's no bloodbath and act as a neutral peace broker.
The international community should send a delegation to Saranda and not to Berisha's party.
Someone must come from the EU, otherwise everyone here will get killed.
Eventually some discipline was restored and opposition leaders organised the first line of defence further down the road. By now talk was not of attacking, but simply ensuring the town was defended. A small artillery piece arrived and was placed on high ground overlooking the main road. The mood among the fighters was calmer, though the leaders still spoke of treachery and manipulation from the other side.
We don't want war. We are peaceful people. We don't want anyone to bother us, and we don't want to kill each other. We are being provoked into these problems.
There was also concern that the outside world should be aware of the real intentions of the people of Saranda. Ambulances arrived from the direction of the town of Delvina, outside which an armed clash had been reported. They took the injured to the hospital in Saranda, which is chronically short of medical equipment for treating war injuries and is issuing an urgent appeal. From one of the wounded, an unprecedented first-hand account of the fighting.
The battle took place 2 to 3 kilometers below Delvina. 2 of Berisha's trucks blocked the road, with 70 of his men who took up positions in the road. There were only a few of us, and we weren't very well organized. They took us by surprise. We came out armed in order to fight them. I got shot in the arm, and the bullet is still in there.
Further out of town, we encountered a procession of vehicles taking villagers to a funeral. Last night, one of them, a taxi driver, had been dragged out of his car and shot dead by unidentified men. Everyone here was convinced those responsible were linked to the Albanian secret police, the Sheikh.
At 4 o'clock in the morning, he set out for Kakavia to go across the border, and at a bend in the road below Bistrici, 4 hooded men suddenly appeared. They dragged him out of his car and stood him up against the bonnet. Then the taxi driver told them, "I've only got passengers for the border." One of the men replied, "Keep quiet, dog," and then he emptied 4 bullets into him.
Beyond the stark hilltop cemetery where the funeral was held lay the plain on which the government forces are rumoured to be gathering.
We approached the rebel town of Saranda on a boat from Greece. As we arrived, an Albanian Air Force jet streaked overhead. All over the town, rebels opened fire in a vain attempt to shoot it down. The shooting here is almost continuous as the rebels continue to celebrate their sudden armed uprising against the Tirana government. On the approaches to Saranda, the rebels are now preparing for battle. Heavy machine guns seized from army depots are being mounted at strategic points. Men with military experience are assembling weapons and teaching others how to use them. The rebels now have at least 3 army tanks, which rumble from village to village, spreading the word that the menfolk must mobilize and prepare to fight. The rebels here insist that they don't want to return to communism, as the Albanian government is claiming. They just want justice. What is certain is that every day that this rebellion continues, these people are becoming better organized and more determined. The man commanding the defenders of Saranda is a former army officer. If he loses here, he will face treason charges. But he told me that he and his men are ready to fight and die to drive out what they say is the corrupt government of President Berisha. In this area of southern Albania, the rebellion is spreading. We arrived in a village near Saranda just after rebels had taken it over. Ordinary people appear to support them, though it may mean that their quiet lives are about to be shattered by war. Nearby, people are still looting an abandoned army base, which has provided the rebels with many of their weapons. Demonstrations demanding the president's removal continued tonight, and the town echoed with gunfire as the rebels lit up the night sky with bursts from their machine guns. With reports that the army may be preparing to move in, these guns may soon be fired not just in defiance, but in anger. Julian Manyon, News at 10, Saranda.
The importance of the town of Delvina is that it lies on one of the two main approach roads to the coast and to the port of Saranda, which has been in opposition hands since the weekend. The townspeople here have also taken sides against President Berisha, despite the fact that in the most recent local government elections, the majority voted for the president's Democratic Party, the PD. Since the latest wave of unrest began, however, Sali Berisha has personally issued an ultimatum for the town to lay down its weapons or risk an attack. Yesterday, one of his Air Force jets did carry out a sortie over Delvina. We found local fighters putting out a fire in the hills above the town, which they say was caused by one of the bombs dropped. Another fire was visible on a nearby hill. If their target was Delvina itself, the Air Force pilots either missed deliberately or were very inaccurate. The bombing has certainly done nothing to intimidate the men who have taken up arms against President Berisha. They're patrolling the surrounding countryside, ready to repel government forces. Yesterday, a gun battle took place between Delvina and Saranda, in which 2 government soldiers and 4 opposition fighters were injured. The men here were anxious to impress on us the fact that they were fighting for democracy and needed help from Europe and the West.
We are all people. We are the terrorist group like the other may think. I don't know what European people are thinking about the Albanian, but I think we are so gentle and quiet, and we don't want the war.
The fighters here are led by the commander of the local military region, which extends down to the Greek border. He doesn't want to be identified. He's thrown in his lot with the opposition and promises to provide them with experienced military leadership.
Soon, the people fighting in the mountains will be much better organized. Neither Berisha's nor any other army will be able to defeat us. Berisha has to understand he must not send Albanians to kill other Albanians. Would he allow his own children to die in order to keep him in power?
Overnight, 3 men suspected of being members of President Berisha's secret police were taken prisoner by opposition fighters. They were beaten, and 2 of them are now in a hospital in opposition-held Saranda. At least one of them is thought to have been involved in yesterday's gun battle outside Delvina.
This man was stranded in the village of Vrioni, and a local man questioned him. He admitted having been brought in by helicopter, but he said he had spent the time since then in Greece. However, he couldn't remember where he'd been or who he'd been staying with. So we believe he's really a member of the secret police.
President Berisha has conceded that he has no control over 3 towns in the south. The opposition here is just hoping that diplomatic intervention from European organization arrives before the authorities in Tirana impose their own military solution. Gjallica, Channel 4 News, Saranda.
Albania today is a nation divided. The president's men have the north, we followed their tanks rumbling towards the rebel strongholds in the south of the country. President Berisha's police control all roads out of the capital, but apart from their constant checkpoints, life appeared to be continuing as normal in the dozens of small towns and villages we passed through during a 4-hour journey from Tirana. But all that changed in the mountains around Memolia. Here too there were truckloads of soldiers, but all of them heading quickly back north, away from known areas of unrest. Suddenly it was clear we had crossed an invisible boundary and entered the other Albania. We were greeted by gangs of armed men. Fatmir, a village leader, told me a people's army had risen and driven the government soldiers away from Tepelina. The rebels have their own roadblocks. Anyone suspected of working for the government is interrogated at gunpoint. Forced to denounce President Berisha or risk the consequences. To demonstrate the control they now exert over the area, the rebels led us into their stronghold of Tepelina. We were shown heavy weapons captured from the army. These will protect our new freedom, they boasted. There are now 2 Albanias. Here in Tepelina, as in other towns in the south, the people have declared independence. However, President Berisha's army remains just a few miles down the road. While we were in Tepelina, fighters brought in 2 men. They claimed they were members of Shiku, the government's secret police who'd been trying to infiltrate their force. Everyone, it seems, is nervous, expecting a government counterattack, despite the president's assurances that he will not send in the army. This evening, these men were heading up into the mountains to reinforce the town's defences. Paul Davis, News at 10, Tepelina, South Albania.
We drove for 6 hours on completely deserted mountain roads to reach the place which is the heart of this rebellion, the town of Vlora. We were the first TV crew to reach Vlora since journalists were evacuated last Monday, and the rebels seemed extremely tense. As night fell, the streets emptied. Albanian army units are near the town, and teams from the government's secret police are operating inside it. Throughout the night, nervous rebels have been trying to keep up their spirits by loosing off wild bursts of gunfire. But they're now having to consider how this extraordinary uprising might end. Will they accept the government's latest concessions, or will they try to hold out for their stated aim, the removal of the president? The answer came this morning at a mass rally in the central square. The crowd and a series of speakers angrily rejected President Berisha's offer of an amnesty if they lay down their arms. The basic reason, they simply don't trust the president to keep his word.
Berisha must resign immediately. If he doesn't go, this whole region will explode.
At a police station, we saw why many people are afraid to give up their weapons. We found members of the Albanian secret police, the dreaded Sheik, once again operating in Vlora. Their commander produced a hand grenade and threatened to detonate it if we didn't leave at once. North of Vlora, we found the Albanian army itself. President Berisha has ordered a 48-hour halt to military activity, but with the rebels rejecting his terms, no one knows what will happen when that deadline runs out. Julian Manyon, News at 10, Vlora.
On the gun emplacements covering the approaches to Vlora, not a great deal of attention was being paid to President Berisha's demands as the clock began counting down on his 48-hour ultimatum this morning. Opposition fighters were being fed by their friends and neighbours from the town's dwindling stocks. On this rooftop, supplies of weapons and ammunition were far more plentiful. As to the deal whereby the rebellious townspeople lay down their arms while government forces hold back for 2 days, there was defiant contempt.
The people of Vlora will only hand over their guns if Berisha and his entire government resign, and he comes here in person to collect them. We are strong people and we're sure we're going to win, and when we do, we will demand the return of our money, which was stolen by Berisha and the Serbs.
If you don't respect them, if you don't give them what they want, I don't think in Vlora this would happen. They are decided to do till they will be respected.
The fighters have armed themselves with weapons taken from an army barracks on the outskirts of town, abandoned last weekend. It was set ablaze last night by unknown people, presenting a serious risk of a potentially devastating explosion if the shells and landmines lying all around were detonated. A rally was held on Vlora's main square, where the town's newly appointed leadership read out its response to President Berisha's announcement. It said that the fighters would not lay down their arms until a government of technocrats was appointed to rule Albania. The message echoed by the crowd being that it should be untainted by links with the president. The speakers accused Sali Berisha of playing for time while his secret police, the Sheikh, sowed panic among the people and urged anyone who sheltered such infiltrators to give them up. In the past 36 hours, 9 people, including the mother and son whose photographs were displayed with their death notices nearby, had been shot dead in mysterious circumstances. Those prepared to talk about the threat from secret police are themselves nervous of being identified.
The state itself has terrorized the town. Berisha's men are extremely well paid to spread panic throughout and to kill people.
The bodies of the woman and her son had been dumped by this bridge a few miles north of Vlora. It marks the edge of the territory held by opposition fighters who have placed dynamite underneath it in case of attack. Government forces are deployed in the hills beyond. In between is no man's land. Vlora is distinguished in history by being the town where Albanian independence was first declared in 1912, when Turkish domination was ended. It was here also that the protests about collapsed pyramid saving schemes this year turned into wider political turmoil, claiming President Berisha and his Democratic Party benefited from the schemes at the expense of the people. That anger first showed itself in attacks on shops owned by conglomerates such as VEFA, the largest of the companies offering pyramid savings. The unrealistically high interest rates offered by such schemes are what supported countless unemployment-stricken Albanians who invested money from relatives abroad.
We want new elections. We don't want this government because they're all thieves. Albanians have gone to Greece and Italy to work and have little money because the government's taken everything. There's no bread, no meat, no cheese, nothing. And the government wants us to disarm.
Many Albanians sold their flats to raise money to invest in the schemes, and losses of some $20,000 are not uncommon. But the empty marketplaces of Vlora, which has now been cut off from the capital Tirana and most of the country for a month, show the effect on ordinary people's lives of opposition supporters taking violent action in pursuit of political ends.
The people of Vlora are, for the time being at least, in no mood to surrender their arms until their own demands are met. Their problem and that of the other opposition-held towns, however, is that there's no sign of the revolt against President Berisha spreading. And as he holds back from launching an all-out attack, he may well be relying on siege tactics and demoralization to wear down his armed opponents. Gabi Rado, Channel 4 News, Vlora.
Mountain villages have become fortresses as a defiant people prepare to defend their newly declared independent state of South Albania. It was only yesterday these rebel fighters took control of the village of Frata outside Tepelina, with its strategic position over the main road from the north. These uniforms and most of the guns were looted from army depots. The rebels are aware that an official amnesty for handing in stolen weapons is about to expire, but dismiss the deadline as another of President Berisha's tricks. Far from surrendering their weapons, these fighters are now reinforcing their hilltop positions. Although they say they're confident the men they see as their brothers in the army will not move against them. If that confidence is misplaced, the rebels know they're in serious trouble. They told us the army had moved a column of tanks to within a mile of the village. They fired shots in the air, they said, because they knew the soldiers were listening to them. Just outside the village, we found the government tanks. The crews had indeed been listening to the gunfire. But would they attack the rebels, if so ordered? I don't want to fight my brother Albanians, the tank commander admitted, though he added that orders were orders. There's no doubt President Berisha's army outgunned the rebels, but many of his soldiers are now openly admitting they have no stomach for a civil war. Paul Davis, ITN, South Albania.
Southern Albania took another step towards complete anarchy today as rebels looted the army base at Gjallica. The troops had deserted their posts, and once again the rebels' first target was the armory, where crates of automatic rifles and boxes containing millions of rounds of ammunition were ripped open by the mob. Even children stole guns and puzzled over how to fire them. This is one of the most serious setbacks that the government has yet suffered. It had been hoping to use this army base as a jumping-off point for a counter-offensive in the south. Instead, the base and thousands of weapons have now fallen into the hands of the rebels. But the scale of this disaster for the government was in fact even greater than we had imagined. 5 miles away, soldiers guarding the equipment of an entire armoured division had fled. Rows of tanks stood outside, and behind the doors of bomb-proof tunnels we found still more of them, fueled up and with their ammunition already on board. More than 60 tanks were abandoned here to the rebels by soldiers who left so quickly that they didn't have time to finish their breakfasts. We found 3 of the deserters. This soldier said that they simply couldn't fire on their own people, then shouted angrily that Albania now has no government at all. As rebels celebrated in the town, it was difficult not to agree. Julian Manyon, ITN, Gjallica.
Early morning in the centre of Permet, just hours after it fell into opposition hands. A man steps up in front of the town hall and addresses a crowd which then increases in size. It's a scene becoming more and more familiar in southern Albania as the insurrection grows. The man, a PE teacher by trade, is advising people to be careful with their weapons, especially as there's a store of explosives nearby. Though arguments follow just inside the town hall doors, with a sudden vacuum of authority, there is more organisation every time a new town joins the opposition, and there's a united rejection for President Berisha's latest offer.
We think the president's tricks are coming to an end. They're ending because everything he's done up till now has blown up in space, not in anybody else's. The only tragedy is that we should not have reached this point. The people have got weapons in their hands without knowing who the enemy is.
Permet's own tragedy was that 5 people were killed in the chaos overnight as power was wrestled from the government. Militants took out their anger at the town's police station. It's the only physical symbol of what the people here hate and fear most, the chic secret police, who have no badges of office and have quickly melted away from town. Held prisoner in a room at the local hospital, a group of men who had been on the government's side. Some were clearly beaten by the townspeople to whom they had surrendered. After early confusion in which some accused them of killings, it became clear, partly through the intervention of our guide and interpreter, that they too were victims of assault.
Well, what they told me is that they were recruited 2 days ago, directly by the Minister of Defense. They've told them that the Greeks are attacking the South Albania, so you have to go and defend the country.
You recognized some of them, didn't you?
Yes, they were with me in the school. We've been together in the school.
What was your reaction when you discovered that?
I mean, extremely terrible. I mean, those people were lied and were sent here to kill innocent people.
It was over the weekend that it became clear to opposition fighters, to outside observers, and to President Berisha himself that the rebellion in the south was spreading and could no longer be ignored. The capture of an army base half buried in a hill near Gjallica, in which we counted more than 50 tanks, meant that the forces ranged against the president had at their disposal some impressive firepower. Albanian men do national service, and there'd be no shortage of skills to operate the weapons, but that may not now be necessary.
I believe all the world is against Berisha. He can't resist anymore.
Do you think these tanks will ever be used by the people?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Because Albanians are not so worried, are not so in love with the guns and the war and something like that. They are peaceful people.
More evidence that the government has given up even the pretense of authority in the south is their abandonment of one of the main border crossings into Greece. The opposition, consisting of 10 parties, now has to show it's mature and well organised enough to respond. At least one of its senior members is concerned that his colleagues in Tirana are out of touch.
The Albanian opposition is now not in contact with these people of this region, and I believe that the decision-making body is no more in Tirana, but is also in these regions. And that there are two parties, the party of Berisha and the party of the people. And I'm not sure that the opposition is doing the best. I'm afraid that it is going out of the current policies.
And what the majority of people in the opposition-held towns in the south seem to want is that President Berisha should resign before any new political moves are set in motion. President Berisha is blamed by the people for setting north against south, neighbour against neighbour. His acceptance of a coalition government in new elections appears to have come too late. Too many weapons have fallen into the hands of his opponents, too much blood has been spilt in the streets. It would take an enormous effort of persuasion now by opposition leaders in Tirana to suppress the popular hunger for a totally new political order in Albania. Gabi Rado, Channel 4 News, Permet.
50 miles from the capital, tracers light up the night sky in the mountain town of Berat. This extraordinary revolt is now spreading into central Albania. There's no organisation, no central command, just town after town exploding into anarchy. In Berat, the mob's first stop was once again the army depot. Thousands more guns were looted and the main storeroom left on fire. Shortly before the mob stormed these army barracks, the police chief in this town is said to have called his men together and advised them to pack up all their personal belongings and to leave by whatever means they could. What is happening here is the complete collapse of central government authority, and it is difficult to see how President Berisha can possibly survive. In Berat this morning, members of the president's ruling party called for calm, but the crowd was in no mood to listen and surged forward, baying for the president's removal. The podium was engulfed and the two sides fought for control of the microphone. In the end, the microphone became irrelevant, but the message for the president was clear.
All Albanian people want to let our president out!
Higher in the mountains, we found still more towns gripped by the same fever. Around them, a countryside teeming with looters. Many people who lost everything in the pyramid frauds now believe that they can recoup at least some of the losses by ransacking army and government stores. And this is one reason why the revolt is spreading. The armed forces are simply falling apart. Near Berat, they abandoned 25 combat aircraft to the rebels. A government armoured group passed us heading for the town, then turned around in apparent confusion. An officer told me that they had just received orders to return to the capital. Now there will be peace, he said, but the mountains are still echoing to the sounds of gunfire. Julian Manyon, News at 10, Berat.
There's heightened tension in the Albanian capital at the end of a day when we've seen what appeared to be young soldiers breaking the curfew in Tirana's main square, chanting Vlora, Vlora, the name of the town where the popular uprising began. These army guards have good reason to be nervous. Tonight, two of their bases on the outskirts of Tirana have been raided by crowds looking for weapons. And armed men who are not soldiers or secret police have been seen today on the capital's streets. But the clearest sign that President Berisha is losing his grip happened where it was least expected. If this uprising has its roots in the deep south of Albania, today it's spread to President Berisha's northern power base. At the mountain town of Roshen, 55 miles north of the capital, we witnessed an outbreak of lawlessness to rival anything that has happened in the south. Following the familiar pattern, the town's army base was the first target. The people told us the soldiers had slipped away during the night, so they were helping themselves. There were enough guns here to equip a small army. We saw children as young as 7 with newly acquired rifles. There seems to be no sexual discrimination when it comes to looting the government arsenal. I asked this woman what she was going to do with the guns. Use them if I have to, she said. She blamed President Berisha for leading the country into anarchy. President Berisha was born in these mountains. These people have traditionally provided his power base. If they have now turned against him, it's hard to see how he can survive. Those he saw as his closest allies have taken up arms. Government rule replaced by the law of the gun and self-interest. These are dangerous hours for the president. Paul Davis, News at 10, North Albania.
20 miles south of Tirana, we found rebels firing wildly at an empty police van. These men were in a state of fury. Only an hour before, they had tried to raid an army weapons store near the town of Elbasan, and unusually, the police guarding it had fired on them. 2 rebels were killed, and the brother of one of them swore vengeance. At this spot, what was a largely bloodless revolt has suddenly become blood feud. The brother of one of the men who was apparently killed here by the police this morning has just raced back to his village to try and raise a force to attack the policemen who are just down the road about a mile over there. And that could make the situation around the town of Elbasan explode. Yes, sir. The rebels here have only just taken up arms, but they're now determined to drive out the police altogether.
The police go, 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 go.
We found the policeman who fired this morning's fatal shots still guarding the army depot nearby. This small base is now set to become another flashpoint. Back in the village, young men piled into a truck. They were heading off to collect more weapons from another army base that's already under rebel control. Tomorrow, they say, they will try to attack the policemen who killed their friends.
Albania is now a country out of control. A night sight camera captured the moment gangs armed with stolen guns moved onto the streets of Tirana. Overnight, the anarchy that has swept through the south arrived in the capital. And once again, no one tried to stop people looting army warehouses.
Outside the British embassy, families gathered with their bags for evacuation to safety. About 100 people responded quickly to an urgent call made necessary by the worsening turn of events.
Well, we feel that the situation has deteriorated rapidly overnight. It is a serious one. There are a lot of guns out on the street and it's not safe for people to stay.
Are you cooperating with the Americans in making your evacuation plans?
Yes, all through this crisis we have been coordinating closely with European Union member states and also the United States. So we are sharing our experience with them.
There was much British phlegmatism on display.
We couldn't get out on normal means on the scheduled flight, so that more than likely we would have to be evacuated out. So we've come here at 2 o'clock, presented ourselves, and here we are, waiting for the master plan.
It seems that the insurgents, if that's the word, are taking over town after town, and yet nobody seems to be counter-attacking or trying to stop them. So maybe people are basically all on the same side.
It was early morning when the first of today's dramatic rescue missions began. Italian Air Force Chinooks swooped into Tirana's tiny football stadium, spraying onlookers with dirt. 150 foreign nationals, including a small group of Britons, were waiting to flee the anarchy of Tirana. Anarchy that had Italian soldiers scanning the stadium anxiously and embassy officials frantically waving forward people on their list to leave. A small Italian girl was on that list. but for some reason her father wasn't. The sobbing girl simply refused to go. As the first of 3 helicopters lifted off for Italy, the girl and her father found themselves left behind. In the space of minutes, grief turned to joy, and the man started kissing the Italian soldiers when officials cleared him to leave. And then the two of them were scrambling up the steps of the last helicopter for their flight to safety. Arriving more quietly on the same aircraft, a small group of British soldiers. They will protect the embassy until the last Briton is evacuated. At the embassy, some charity workers were waiting to be rescued. Ian Hughes refused a seat on a helicopter because his American fiancée wasn't allowed to go with him.
Yesterday I tried to evacuate, but they said that Megan couldn't come out with me, so we went to the American embassy instead, and they said the same thing to us, that we'd have to separate. But we said, no thank you, stuck it out this far.
On the other side of this chaotic city, the massive US rescue effort was soon underway. Helicopter after helicopter landed and took off next to the US Embassy compound on Tirana's outskirts.
Get back, get back! Move back.
US Marines in full combat gear set up a defensive perimeter as a well-oiled operation ran throughout the day, ferrying US citizens to an aircraft carrier in the Adriatic. It was German evacuees who really tasted fear in Tirana today. With the sound of gunfire all around, panic broke out near the helicopters, and some German soldiers opened fire. In the city centre, the Albanian government was desperately trying to reassert its authority with a show of force. A convoy of armed gunmen accompanied the Prime Minister, and the government has ordered the police and security services to mount a crackdown. President Berisha's survival now depends almost entirely on these men, members of Albania's secret police, the organisation known as SHIK. Tonight they have received orders to mobilise, to try and restore order to this capital. It is still far from clear whether or not they will succeed. The show of force is still going on, but even if President Berisha manages to secure the capital, the rest of the country is still in chaos. Julian Manyon, News at 10, Tirana.
Another day, another group of armed men attempting to take control of the Albanian capital. They are a mixture of soldiers, police officers and volunteers answering President Berisha's plea to drive the rebels off the streets. Their main tactic is intimidation, but it has met with some success. In Tirana's central Skanderberg Square, a small crowd gathered to acclaim a pause at least in the spread of looting and street anarchy. American Super Stallion helicopters have continued the evacuation of foreign citizens from Tirana. The British Embassy believe the only Britons remaining are those who refuse to go.
Some people feel they've got very strong commitments here. There are people running orphanages, homes for unwed mothers. They don't feel they can leave. Their place is here.
The latest group of foreign nationals to be evacuated have included sick and handicapped from a dozen different countries. They gather inside the fortified American compound for the rescuers to arrive. Cobra attack helicopters ready to eliminate any threat to the evacuation. Even so, as one group of foreign citizens were just a few steps from safety, there was an alert. A large group of armed Albanians had been spotted approaching the perimeter fence. Their intention was unclear. 100 Marines trained their gun sights. The Cobra prepared its cannon for an attack that never came, but the tension seemed to reach a young child still waiting for a lift to safety.
For now, protecting their own citizens is the priority of the Western powers. There's clearly no appetite for risking these soldiers in any attempt to impose law and order on the local population. Paul Davis, ITN, Tirana.
It was mid-morning when a crowd of desperate men burst through police lines to the quayside in the port of Durrës. These men are trying to leave Albania not because they're in fear for their lives, but because they have no money, no jobs, and no hope. For them, the only chance is to get to another country. They managed to push their way through to the dockside, only to find that there are no ships. And then it started. The police fired in the air and charged the crowd. Someone had ordered that the port area be cleared by force, and the Albanian authorities proved once again that they are experts at making a bad situation worse.
There was this fighting with this policeman, and they killed one of us. So these people, they want to kill them now.
In the capital, Tirana, government supporters staged a demonstration calling for peace. President Berisha's spokesman insists that he will not resign and say that the government's rule will be restored throughout the country.
As you've seen in Tirana, the situation is calm today. It was calm yesterday, so there is a definite turn for the better, and we hope very much we could extend that normality to the other parts of the country.
Tonight, armoured vehicles carrying members of the secret police and volunteers from President Berisha's home area in the north set up roadblocks on the outskirts of Tirana. The capital is now relatively secure, but it remains to be seen whether the president can re-establish his authority in the south of Albania, which has so clearly and dramatically rejected his rule. Julian Manyon, ITN, Tirana.
Vlora is where the first shots were fired, and they're firing still. The police are back on the streets, but they don't stop, because here the revolution isn't over yet. The rebel leaders invited us into their headquarters, where in smoke-filled rooms they're deciding what to do next. Their leader frustrated that Albania's president won't resign. So they've issued an ultimatum to President Berisha: resign within 48 hours or else.
Ultimatumi përdoreqe deri në datën 20.
Berisha have to go down immediately.
How they'll bring him down is another matter. They wouldn't say what they'll do if the president stays put. This is where the revolution began, and this is also where it may end. There is no sign whatsoever that the people of the south want to march on the capital or to fight a civil war to get rid of their president. For the once confident President Berisha, things have changed utterly since I interviewed him as the revolt began.
Protests are normal, and I never will imagine a democracy without protests.
Today, he is glimpsed only briefly on state television, virtually imprisoned in his palace. This European Union delegation has just met him. Today, they learnt the reality of his Albania, unable to go where they wanted because of gunmen.
No, we cannot go there because they've just been shooting.
European observers are in the south tonight, where the graves are fresh, but the hope's high that Albania's rebellion will not reignite. Bill Neely, News at 10, Vlora.
The rebels had expected the Prime Minister in the southern city of Gjallica around midday. Late last night, he announced on television he wouldn't accept their central demand, the resignation of President Berisha. This morning, the meeting place was set up in the city. The Prime Minister then cancelled his visit altogether. The rebels' deadline for the resignation is midnight tomorrow. The clock's ticking and face-to-face talks appear to be off. One of the local rebel committee leaders was diplomatic, saying the Prime Minister's a busy man. When I asked what they'd do if the President refuses to go, he said the National Committee will decide that. If President Berisha is still in power at midnight tomorrow, then a key rebel advisor predicts two outcomes, both of them violent.
One is that the movement is going to be loosed, and it will create anarchy, and it will be very difficult for Albania and for our neighbors. And the other way is maybe they will march toward Tirana, let's say, as uprisers. Anyway, they have a lot of weapons, even tanks, airplanes, and other things.
So were the rebels in Gjallica and 8 other towns naive in calling the resignation deadline in the first place?
No, it was not naive. They couldn't. There are no professional politicians there, and it's normal that they are articulating bluntly their main demand.
Should it come to blunt action, then the military leaders appear as untested as the uprising's politicians. At Ashlengo, 5 miles from Gjallica, the rebels have about 70 tanks in and around these tunnels and artillery. But whether they have the training, personnel, or even the diesel to make an advance to Tirana or anywhere else remains a large question. But away from Gjallica, across rebel areas, local committees are also organising in every major town, trying to bring order. Businessman and former MP Ridvan Pishkapias in Vlora with its rebel committee. He'd already arranged for them to send delegates to the National Committee of Salvation.
I decided to help them, trying to organize them, to sit all the local movements in a table and helping them having a national organism and a national attitude about what happened.
At the northern frontier of rebel-held territory, he passes time with the police. Except these officers answer to the rebels, not the government. And in a nearby cafe, Vlora's committee greets an EU aid delegation.
I will make it very clear at the very beginning that we are not here for political talks.
If President Berisha goes before the deadline expires, the rebels say they'll cease to function like this. If he stays, they claim they will establish an alternative southern government. But they face chronic problems of disorganisation and general chaos across the south. Saranda and the town's prison, or what's left of it. Like the police station here, it was ransacked during the recent uprising, and the inmates are long gone. Rebel leaders have mixed feelings about this. There's sympathy for attacking symbols of the hated president's authority, but having the south infested with liberated bandits and mafiosi gives the rebel politicians a big security problem.
Because the fact is, this is not simply a public uprising against the government, it's also a mass crime wave with groups of armed men across Albania exploiting the situation in which there is no law and precious little order. And on many of the main roads there are roadblocks set up. It's often impossible to tell the difference between the rebels and bandits. So it is that routes like this one across the mountains, small country routes, are often the safest way to travel.
By imposing a deadline, the rebels have now boxed themselves into a corner. If President Berisha doesn't go in the next 24 hours, their bluff will have been called. And the rebels will have to decide if this really is an uprising or a passing protest. Alex Thompson, Channel 4 News, Southern Albania.
The latest victim of Albania's gun madness. The man who shot him lives here, or he did, before the bereaved family did this to his flat. The ancient blood feuds of the Balkans are now being fueled by an astonishing supply of weapons, hundreds of thousands of them, available for violence, hire or revenge. These men want to capture the young man's killer. In Albania today, there are more guns out of control than in any country in Europe. The dusty hill town of Rashen looked normal today. Police on the streets, a flourishing market. But things here are far from normal. This is Rashen a week ago. The army depot is being looted and tens of thousands of guns are taken away by farmers, teachers, children. Enough weapons to equip a small army. And where have all the weapons gone? Behind Grandma Joka's sofa, guns for the family.
This is a Kalashnikov.
Kalashnikov, yeah, from Russia.
So one Kalashnikov and a Chinese rifle.
Yeah.
Have you bullets as well?
Yeah.
And hand grenades. All, says Glenn Joka, to protect the family. In this poor town today, every family has guns.
How many guns does he have at home now?
15, I think.
15 guns at home?
Yeah.
What's he going to do with them?
I don't know. Maybe to earn some money, to get some money.
To sell them?
Yeah.
Albanian gun smuggling to Italy and on its doorstep to Bosnia is about to boom.
The government says so far Albanians have handed back 2,000 pistols, 2,000 submachine guns, 60 grenade launchers, 1,300 grenades and 4 million rounds of ammunition. Even if these figures are true, that still leaves the vast majority of weapons in private hands.
In children's hands. There are no weapons left at the depot, just manuals on how to use them.
People have kept the guns, some because they're afraid, some to sell, others for violence and robbery. We ourselves have just become victims of Albania's gun culture. Here, just a few minutes ago, two men armed with automatic weapons robbed us. First, they wanted to take our camera, they pointed their weapons at us and threatened to shoot. They took our car and drove it away, firing as they left. The Gjallica family immediately got their guns and grenades, their cousins and neighbours, more than 100 in all, to chase the men who'd stolen our car.
You're gonna stay here.
We didn't get it back. These journalists also had their car stolen today by other heavily armed men. So this is lawless Albania, where police officers search for weapons, but only for the camera. They were lying in a field when we drove by. Where state television shows weapons being returned, but where you can't meet anyone who's done so. Where people are desperate and poor, but where suddenly they have a dangerous wealth and a lethal power and a frightening future. Bill Neely, News at 10. After the violence and the voting, the victory chants. The socialists here say they've won. Their #1 priority, persuading Albanians to hand back 1 million looted guns.
They will cooperate with us in disarming the society, collecting weapons, and putting them back to their warehouses.
Albanians may not be so obliging. These in celebration at the defeat of a president. President Berisha is accepting defeat, but he has not resigned, not yet anyway. One murder, several shootings. International observers say there were serious problems, but the election was adequate.
In one or two areas, things did not go as well as we would have hoped, and we're still investigating that.
Adequate is hardly a ringing endorsement, is it?
Given the circumstances of the election, it's not too bad.
Many observers are leaving already, leaving behind Europe's poorest country and its crippling problems. Soon, all the observers and the foreign troops will be gone, and Albania will begin a hard climb back to normality. Its economy in ruins, its confidence dented, its criminals rampant. It has tonight only a very fragile peace. Bill Neely, News at 10, Tirana.